I'm going to have a discussion with a collaborator called Greg on this issue of the so-called refugees and migrants coming from Syria to Western Europe. And I shall be talking from a particular position from what I call the Freudian Lacanian text, from categories given to us by Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan. It's something which is quite close to my political preoccupations, myself being French, and having had families, my family, French family, living through the exodus in France through World War II. And it also refers to the post-war situation in Western Europe immediately after the war, where there was a complete breakdown of the law, and practically everyone was in exodus. And the first thing I want to say is that I do not consider these Syrian people on the move as refugees or migrants. They are simply other human beings, running away from destructions, from bombs falling on their heads, wanting to continue living. And most especially, I consider them as fleeing the mass identification with one of the three groups, all fighting one another. And it's pretty much a political choice by fleeing that particular country, and all the protagonists of the war, they do at the same time protect themselves from what is called mass identification. And there's one thing I find absolutely remarkable in the reactions, various reactions from the Western countries, including the ex-Eastern countries, is that being born in a contingent manner on a particular territory, it suddenly becomes yours, and it becomes yours to defend. It is my country, it is our country. Mm-hmm. And that's something quite surprising. But once we put in place some Freudian Lacanian categories, it does not become surprising any longer. We are confronted, we're in front of a structure, a particular structure. Mm-hmm. And I would find it interesting to look at those structures. The one thing also to note is that in order to constitute a group, there must be at least one who is excluded from the group.
Of course, yeah.
And that one actually holds, in a way, the secret, the key of a structure, because that one who is being excluded is the one who demonstrates or sends me back in a mirror my own alienness. Mm-hmm. What Lacan used to call the extimate. It's a compound word from external and intimate. It is something which is in me. But
so both in you and out of you. A double internality, externality, right?
Indeed, yes. Yeah. So il a forgé en français, he made up that word. Yeah. Extimate. Something interesting happened during the so-called Age of Enlightenment, in that they tried to actually get rid of that extimate because they thought it was a bad thing, and I'll elaborate on that further on. Mm. And once you've put someone in the position of an alien, a foreigner, the only solution for that other is to actually flee away.
Right.
To go on a flight, literally a flight, yes. Mm. For instance, towards another country where he becomes invisible through integration. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the results of putting someone else who is a kind of challenge into that particular position. Mm. And it is the age, during the Age of Reason, that a legal concept of the alien, the foreigner, was put into place. And it led to a kind of paradox, because is alien someone who is not like us? Mm-hmm. And therefore it's based on exclusion.
Exclusion and an identification as well.
And identification as well, and we will develop on that later on.
Right.
Therefore, it is the legislation which creates that exteriority.
Ah, the law.
The law,
indeed, yeah.
And it implies, therefore, a group organized around a conception of power.
Mm-hmm.
You need the concept of power, and in order to put in place the concept of legality.
Absolutely, I see Lacan here, yeah.
And it's the same for religion. Therefore, we end up with having inside the state and outside of the state.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very similar to Hegel's formulation of A and non-A.
Okay, you may have to remind me a little bit how that works.
This is Hegel's dialectics, whereby Mr. A goes and sees someone who is not like him. So he goes and have a chat with Mr. Non-A.
Okay.
And out of that chat, he is transformed.
Right.
Because he's transformed, he's in a new state. So he's state number 2. So he needs to go and see someone else, another one who is not like him, in order to find out about himself.
Okay,
That's what the dialectic is about.
I see.
Okay. And out of that, Hegel and the what took place in the Age of Enlightenment, we suddenly find ourselves with rights of citizen, together with the rights of man, or the rights of humans.
Okay, as distinct, the two, citizen and man?
They are distinct indeed, because if you are a human or a man, as in rights of man, you are not a citizen.
Yeah, okay.
If you are a citizen, you are no longer a man or human.
Right. So you accept a new symbolic identity and
Indeed.
Okay.
So there is a contradiction, because you can't be both at the same time.
Yes.
You can't be a citizen and a human at the same time.
Yeah, okay. And now we enter properly into the field of alienation.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And all that is pretty much the inheritance we got from the Age of Reason. And all that leads to an enjoyment or jouissance to designate one other as an alien. And this is very, very different when you're confronted to the difference which you find in the love field, because that difference is what actually fascinates you.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
That difference becomes the equivalent of the Lacanian phallus. And that's what is going to structure your love relationship.
Absolutely, the thing that you do not have.
Indeed.
Yeah, the part missing from you.
And it leads to another thing as well, which is that at the very best, the foreigner, the alien, becomes a problem to be managed in an administrative way. And this is where we get into massive delusion, as during the Nazi regime. And that's why the Nazi regime was so strong on administration. But the same also during the French Revolution, during the time of the terror.
This is a very interesting point. Okay. So why is it that administration, or presumably bureaucratic procedures, highly symbolic procedures, have this connection to the status of the foreigner, to the excluded?
This is the way to tame and therefore direct the jouissance, the enjoyment at designating an other as a foreigner.
Okay.
You're not dealing with single individuals any longer.
No.
In that particular maniacal delusion, suddenly a whole people, millions of people, become a problem to be managed in an administrative manner. And this is why all those administrations, all those regimes are so fond of paperwork.
Right, I see. So this paperwork then is an attempt to what symbolically contain the jouissance of the other, the desire of the other, and so
Indeed,
on.
yes.
Okay, yeah.
And that has two structured consequences. One, belonging can become fanatic confinement, shutting away. And this is what we're seeing at the moment with all those borders being closed down.
Yeah, well, confinement is a very fitting term indeed, yeah.
And the other consequence is that as soon as you've designated someone else as an alien, as a foreigner, that foreigner in return is going to question your own link to your jouissance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is what we are faced with. This is a particular structure we are faced with.
And this is the sense in which you relate it to this Hegelian relation.
Indeed, yes.
That first we go to someone different, and then that different person means that we have to realise our own identity in a different way. And so
Indeed,
on.
yes.
Okay.
There is an interesting historical, a series of interesting historical precedents here, which are worth looking at. It's not just in our century. We have in Hellenistic Greece, we have Pericles,
Mm-hmm.
who gives a definition of what it is to be Greek. It's someone who has two Greek parents,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes you Greek.
Right.
So we have a definition based on blood.
On heredity, yeah. Okay.
For Socrates, it's a matter of culture. Is Greek someone who participates to our education and culture?
Okay. Difficult to measure, of course.
Very good observation.
Yeah.
This is why, for instance, over the last 10 years in the UK, for immigrants are required to take an exam about British culture.
An exam which I myself, as born British, if we can say that in inverted commas, would definitely fail that test. I know some of the questions on there, and
Therefore, you are not British.
precisely, yeah. But this is interesting in regards to this relation that you put forward right at the beginning, that I have to rethink my own identity as a product of my demand to identify the other. You know, I have to enforce upon them a test where they must be British, but I myself, of course, would fail the test, which means I now have to reconstitute my own identity in relation to their supposedly by my own terms their authentic identity as British. Yeah.
Authentic here is possibly a key word which we can perhaps
Absolutely.
elaborate on later on. For Menandre, Menandre is known for saying that nothing which is human is alien to me, which is an interesting proposition.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the Stoics. You say the Stoics in English?
Yeah, the Stoics. Yeah.
The Stoics, okay. The Stoics put in place this concept of universal conciliation
Mm-hmm.
through a kind of internal touching. And
Okay.
we can elaborate on that by saying it's a kind of a psychical intimacy, but a common psychical intimacy. And that brings us very, very close to Freud.
Okay, common like universal.
Yes, universal. Yes.
Okay, right.
Common to all of us.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And with that particular proposition in place, then you can go beyond the administrative. You can go beyond putting people through tests, sitting exams to prove that they are worth belonging to your particular culture.
Yeah.
Okay. And that inspired Cicero to elaborate this concept of conciliatio commendatio, which became caritas, as in charity, but the noble aspect of charity,
Okay.
being charitable.
Okay. Right.
In Judaism, we have a combination of election, you are chosen,
Mm-hmm.
then alliance, you form an alliance, and then a challenge throughout this, having been chosen and having formed an alliance with God, you are constantly challenged, you are constantly asked to prove your belonging, as in, for instance, the sacrifice of Isaac.
Okay. Okay. Right. I see what you mean. Right. So this is a challenge within your community, the Jewish
Yes.
community here, namely.
Yes.
Right.
And then we have Paul de Trace. I'm not sure his English name is,
That sounds fine. Yeah.
but he inspired Saint Augustine, and he put together this concept of ecclesia, an ecclesia which is addressed to the anxiety of having lost your significations, your identifications. And that's what constitutes the universality of humans, of being human.
Okay,
so it's a response
right, okay.
to whatever anxiety when you don't know where you are any longer. It's not as chastising, you are not punished.
Right.
You don't have to resit your exams.
Yeah.
There is something which St. Augustine says God gives to humans so that they recognize themselves, not only themselves one by one as humans, but everybody else at the same time.
Okay. Right, so we really are at the level of universality then, yeah.
Indeed.
Okay.
So at some point the Age of Reason attempted to inscribe this universality into the law. But that meant that a human had to become a citizen and therefore stopped being a human.
Absolutely, okay. So I mean already with the law as a symbolic form, you necessarily need to exclude. It's exclusionary by nature, the law. It has to push certain things out and put certain things in. So that makes a lot of sense, yeah.
This is part of the Lacanian logic, actually, whereby for something to exist, there must be at least one which is not in the same state. And that's your initial differentiation. So we have this cleavage, this cut between citizen and human. And of course, only the citizen has rights.
Yeah, symbolically designated rights, yeah.
As a human, you don't have any rights. And this led, of course, to the formation of the Société des Nations, Society of the Nations, back immediately after the First World War, in order to stop further wars, where all the nations are gathered together. But what of a territory or a group who does not define itself as a nation, or to whom the status of nation has been refused?
Okay.
And here we have a very clear indication of what's going on with the Palestinian issue.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Can I ask you to elaborate on that a little bit, or?
If you're not a nation, you get nothing.
Right. Yeah. Of course.
In this current organization, the United Nations, for instance, the United Nations.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so you kind of to use the Lacanian term, you exist. You lie somewhere outside of the symbolic order, which means there's no proper place to situate yourself as identified.
That's why perhaps it's so easy for some protagonists to kill those who are at the level of being simply humans, not citizens, and not part of a nation. So now I would like to talk about this question of the other. And I would advise, if those listening to this are interested, to read Freud's Group Psychology and the Ego, where Freud talks about the narcissism of little differences. And that's how you start constituting us, not us. He's not from the same building. He's not from the same village as ours. He's not from the same town. He's not from the same shire. He's not from the same country, etc., etc. He doesn't have the same eye color. His hair is ginger. All that.
And so on, yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
That's what Freud called the narcissism of little differences. And that's what actually allows you to build an identity. Except that identity is actually a fiction.
Absolutely, of course. But it must be constructed.
It must be constructed. And because of the movement of the drive, that construction, that identity is always uncertain. It's always fragile. It's always unstable.
At least, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to contradict you here, but...
Please do.
But the question of the psychotic, or indeed of the pervert in Lacan may... not quite fit into that structure. This problem of uncertainty is something that, from my reading of Lacan, would be identified with the neurotic, really, so the obsession or the hysteric. The fact that there is a question that is not answered ever, really, or is sort of structurally unanswered, is not quite the same within psychosis or perversion.
What I've qualified of unstable and fragile is the identity itself, and then there is your relationship or your feeling towards that identity. The psychotic and the perverse are indeed in certainty.
Yeah, absolutely, of course, yeah.
But at the same
I mean, that's all I was saying. You know, that there's a different kind of level there. Yeah.
At the same time, Lacan also says the psychotic is antisocial, or psychosis is antisocial, in that it's conducing to destroy the social bond, because the psychotic does not have moderation. So the psychotic's unconscious acts directly.
Yeah.
Without
in other words,
mediation.
Mediation. It doesn't have any kind of block. It doesn't have the proper instatement of law to make a differentiation.
Indeed. Yeah. So this identity, which we construct by excluding other, gives us a certainty of belonging to a group. It gives us a sense of unity. So perhaps we are all psychotic if we are certain about this identity.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
And that stems from Lacan's concept of a mirror stage. You recognize a continuity as well as a solidity in your form, but it is an image, it is an imago. Lacan was working very strongly on the concept of imago back in the 40s. And of course that imago becomes problematic, because it's not about to be or not to be, but it's about to belong or not to belong. And this is again what we are seeing very strongly nowadays. Are you one of us?
Okay.
If you are one of us, you can come into our territory. If you're not one of us, go away.
Yeah. No, this is a very interesting distinction between the Shakespearean to be or not to be,
Or
and the
belong.
Yeah, and to belong or not to belong, to be included or to be excluded. Yeah. Yeah.
And this is what also we see a lot in terms of repartition worldwide of wealth.
Right. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Of course.
This is what we are seeing as well with the issue of the so-called Greek debt and the Eurozone. To belong or not to belong to the
Absolutely.
Eurozone.
Yeah. Quite.
And it is the mirror, that mirror, which is going to give you a sense of continuity. So if we look a little bit more into Lacan's mirror stage, we have the other who constitutes me, who builds me as non-him.
So a relation that's purely defined in terms of its opposition.
Indeed, yes. But at the same time, and that's part of the structure, unfortunately, at the same time, it leads to a resentment and hate towards that other, because that sense of continuity he gives me, he may well at some time withdraw it.
Yeah, in which case dissolving my kind of solidified, unified identity.
Indeed.
Yeah, so it's always a threat. The other always poses a threat to the unity of my image. You know.
The other is a gain, but he is also a threat, indeed. And that's a structure which is there. Right. And that's what leads to identification with that other, which means identification is has double-edged sword. It gives me something, but at the same time it can be withdrawn.
It's a loss and a gain, or at least a potential loss and a potential gain.
Indeed, yeah. And you have to live within that field.
Yes, yeah.
So, about the concept of identification now, let's explore this expulsion in regard to this concept of identification. Because whether we love or we hate, we are interested in that other which provoke that feeling. We have an interest, we have a libidinal investment in Freudian terms.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for Freud, very interesting little sentence from his text called The Discontent of Civilization in Civilization. It is always possible to bind together a considerable number of people in love so long as there are other people left over to receive manifestations of their aggressiveness.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And this is a very astute observation. So Freud says that there is something uncanny. The original German word is Unheimlich, which means unfamiliar, which is inside ourselves and which totally escapes us. And that confrontation with that other who gives me my sense of continuity and identity wakens up old psychical conflicts or archaic psychical conflicts which have been repressed. And that's something he talks about in his text called inhibition, symptom, and anxiety. Freud says, it's your problem. It's not the other, it's not the alien, it's you. And that's an extremely important difference here, a very important point. And concerning this identification, Freud proposes 3 modes of identification. The first one is love, and that's what St. Paul defined as the identification to the Father. God the Father loves all his children.
Of course, right, yeah.
We are all, in Christianity, we are all God's children.
And this is the first mode of the Freudian kind of ambivalence to the Father. We both love the Father as the strong person that we want to identify with, but he also, of course, poses a threat to our kind of the sexual gain of the mother, the object of our desire, and so on.
The second identification is one of participation, and it's called hysterical identification. The example given by Freud is a group of young ladies, and one of them receives a letter where her boyfriend is dumping her, and she's in tears. And suddenly, all the other ladies also end up in tears.
Yeah.
It's not an imitation, but an identification, i.e. they do that without realizing that's what they're doing. And it doesn't matter the amount of pain which may be involved. So that's why Freud calls it a hysterical identification.
I mean, incidentally, this idea of hysterical identification, I believe, because I was reading the Traumdeutung earlier, and I think this is the first, in the interpretation of dreams, you find the first instance of Freud's use of the term, although preceded by a letter to Fliss in which he mentions it as well. And he has some quite interesting comments on it.
It's in relation to the butcher's wife dream.
Absolutely.
For those who are interested in Freud's interpretation of dreams.
Yeah. So the butcher's wife identifies with the woman who she suspects her husband is attracted to. Yeah.
And the third mode of identification is what Freud called Einziger, which translates as the unique trait, but which Lacan translated as the unitary traits. It's just one little thing, little characteristic to which you identify.
I think that Lacan at some point refers to this particular kind of identification as the first notch on a post, and I don't know. On a bone, right?
It's on a bone. It's a bone which is tens of thousands years old, and on which there are vertical marks.
Yes, yeah.
Which allowed counting.
Yes.
Or form of counting, a form of arithmetic.
Now, as soon as we talk about arithmetic, I mean, that leads me to ask a question about the distinction between these two forms that you introduce of these two types of identification. First, the hysterical one, and then this second one based on a unitary trait. So, are we talking here about the difference between imaginary identification in the first instance, the hysterical identification that Freud talks about, and symbolic identification on the other hand?
I would formulate it differently. Hysterical identification is identification to a lack.
Okay.
No caviar in the butcher's wife dream. Whereas identification to the Einziger is identification to something.
A thing.
Which is extracted.
A constituted thing,
yes.
Right, okay.
In the case of the Nazi regime, the unique trait was very likely Hitler's moustache.
Okay. Right, very interesting, yeah.
For Lacan, he talks about identification in Seminar 24, the French title of which is very complicated and I would not even consider translate it.
Oh, you must say it in French, though. Of course.
L'insu que c'est de l'une bévue, celle amour.
And now I have to ask you to translate it into
No
some
way.
Right.
Ask Bruce Fink.
Okay.
Lacan says about einzige Zug identification, it is clear that identification is what crystallizes itself into an identity.
Mm-hmm.
So we go back to this conception of the extimate or enigmatic jouissance, enigmatic enjoyment, which is displaced onto an other
Mm-hmm. Okay.
who has provoked that apparition, who has in effect created, who is responsible for this apparition of my enigmatic jouissance, which are automatically displaced onto him. And that's a structure. Right. And therefore that other becomes someone to be isolated, if not to be killed, eliminated. And that's what we had during segregation in the United States in the 60s, during apartheid in South Africa.
Of course, yeah.
And currently with this closing of the borders and this rejection.
To expel the other properly, to
Indeed.
eliminate them, yeah.
This is where you get the expression bouc émissaire. Can't remember what it is in English. In antique Greece, you had this annual ceremony where you'd get goats and it would be blessed by the priest and so on, and then
Slaughtered, right.
escorted out of the city.
Oh, okay, right, just taken away.
Yeah, no, escorted out, expelled from the city,
Yeah.
charged with all the, not sins because that's a Christian concept, but all the faults, all the problems of the city. Put onto this one animal, totemic animal, and then escorted out
Right,
of
yeah.
the city.
So you invest all of your anxieties,
Indeed.
your tensions and so on onto an object, and then you expel that from your symbolic confinement territory. So on.
Indeed, that's what little Hans does.
Right. Okay.
He has a little moment of enigmatic jouissance concerning his body. From then on, either he can fall into anxiety, which is not a very nice situation to be in, or he can construct himself a little defense, a symbolic defense, which is what he does with his phobia of horses. So he displaced his enigmatic jouissance about his body onto the body of a horse, and that becomes a phobia. It allows him to survive.
Well, I mean, so the horse, the phobia that he uses, this phobic object, is the one thing that he needs in order to, if we go with the Lacanian reading, to separate him from the mother. In lack of a proper, the instatement of a proper symbolic function of the father, he must find something.
Indeed.
Otherwise he's lost in nothing. You know?
Lost in the real, lost in nothing,
Absolutely.
lost in the real, as Eric Laurent says, the desert of the real. So, altogether, this foreigner, this alien, this other, refers actually to my difference and to the difference of my own jouissance. Just remember that jouissance is always singular to each of us.
Yeah.
So, what do we do? What can we do?
Nothing. Let's stop there.
No, we can do a little something. We can bring some peace, we can pacify ourselves within ourselves simply by exploring this alienness of ours, which the other brings into question. In order to be able to deal with the foreignness, the alienness of another person, another human, without falling into superego delusion, which can lead to fanaticism, where it becomes a position whereby you decide that so and so is to be excluded, is to be killed, is to be get rid of, actually.
I mean, so this fanaticism is what you would characterise in the regimes you mentioned. So the Nazi regime, the apartheid in South Africa, and so on.
And some current regimes as well.
Of course, yeah.
Where they throw you off a roof.
Yeah.
Or cut your head off.
Yeah.
For being
For being excluded, for being outside of the boundaries of symbolic identity. Yeah.
And this pacifying of oneself, this exploration of my own alienness, can lead to a living together, a form of living together, instead of pushing the others, excluding them, towards what I would qualify as a ferocious big other.
Okay.
And Lacan terminates his seminar 10 on anxiety with a couple of statements. One, sacrifices to obscure gods, which is what I'm mentioning about what I refer to in pushing others towards a ferocious other, an obscure god.
Mm-hmm.
Because normally you sacrifice to a known god, whom you can designate.
Right.
You establish a pact with a particular god.
Yeah.
And in exchange for the sacrifice, he will leave you in peace.
Yes. It's an exchange.
It's an exchange, indeed. This ferocious other is death drive.
Ah, okay. Now it becomes very interesting indeed, yeah.
It's radical, let's call it evil. I don't like that word very much because it has religious connotations, but it is a radical other. And it leads also to a psychical disintegration.
Yes, absolutely. Well, this is its aim, indeed.
And Freud very astutely remarked concerning the Bolshevik Revolution, they're all busy killing their bourgeois now and so on. Mm-hmm. But what will they do when they run out of bourgeois?
Yes.
We saw what they did.
Yeah.
And the same exactly happened during the French Revolution.
Mm.
They ran out of aristocrats to kill, and they started cutting each other's heads off.
Yeah. Well, this is an interesting question, isn't it? Because there's always this question about if we take the example of the left, that you can think about the way that the left reacts to whatever it's complaining about, capitalism, a particular ruling class, or so on, is that it actually requires it as a fantasy. Like, as soon as that goes away, what do we do anymore? So, in some senses, you might say that for the true fanatical left-winger, the nightmarish situation is to lose that persecutory other that supposedly invades, intrudes into their territory that they desire to be expulsed. But the question is whether they really do desire it to be expulsed, and what they will do after it's gone,
And this radical evil, which leads to psychical disintegration, also leads to the disintegration of a social link.
Mm.
And the second remark on which Lacan concludes his seminar 10 is a remark about absolute difference at the end of analysis.
Mm.
And this absolute difference simply means to reconcile yourself to two things. One, your jouissance, your enjoyment, your drive is singular to you and to no one else.
Mm-hmm.
And two, you can use that singularity in order, you can lean on it to build something inside the social bond. So you can, in effect, lean onto your symptom to become part of a social bond.
Mm. So we find here another of these instances where the symptom is characterized in psychoanalysis is not just a problem as such. It has its uses. It has its benefits. It has its functions within its dysfunctionality.
Indeed, apart from isolating you from complete delusion, because the symptom is a compromise formation.
Absolutely, of course,
and it's a help rather than hindrance. But what is problematic with the symptom is you don't know where this symptom comes from and why is it happening to me.
Yeah,
and that's an enigma.
Yeah, it's a radical ambiguity, a kind of impossible unknown. Right?
Indeed, that becomes a way, and that's why you possibly will start an analysis in that respect. So, if we consider that at the very beginning of existence, there is in place something called the need to believe, which leads you to the desire to know.
Are these Freudian terms or
No,
no? Okay.
they're my terms.
Okay. Right.
This need to believe refers, to my mind, to Freud's concept of the immediate identification to the father.
Yeah. Okay.
Need to believe.
Yeah,
Out of
it
this
must
need
be
to
there.
believe, it must be there. And out of that need, it becomes a desire. So we go from the left-hand side of a graph of desire, need, to the right-hand side of a graph of desire, which is desire, the desire to know. And that's what brings you back inside the social bond.
Okay.
So, to my mind, rather than panic concerning those Syrian humans, which at the moment are definitely not citizens,
Yeah.
it's rather than panic about that, we could possibly consider it as an opportunity to explore our own psychical difference, our own singular jouissance.
Which is somewhat. I mean, it's a more profound way of understanding, because I've heard this term opportunity before in commentary about the crisis, and people focus on this kind of left liberals focus on this the opportunity that migrants or refugees can bring to the country in which we at the moment are rejecting them from, which is far more kind of practical and simplistic than the paradigm that you're introducing here, which is more that it brings us an opportunity to look at ourselves a little bit more and find out who we are in relation to this supposedly intrusive external force.
Indeed, yes, that's definitely my position. And I will conclude this talk with a quote from Eric Laurent: "Alone, all together."
Yeah.
And he refers to our use of our gadgets.
Yes, the famous gadgets. Yeah.
The smartphones, the computer, and so on. Alone, all together. However, I'm turning that around. We are together, and it's possible to be together, but also remembering that we are alone, not just alone, but alone with our own singular jouissance. And there is another opportunity for psychical exploration, which possibly can lead to a living all together.
Right.
Well, merci Greg. Do you wish to add anything else?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's a very interesting question. I like this. This. I think it's very correct to characterize this. To first bring up this point that the characterization of refugees or migrants or human beings, as we call them here, to recognize that our problem with them is precisely that we can't identify them really. We don't find a symbolic position for them within our own inclusory identification. That they're kind of floating, and it's that problem that we have, that that we don't know their proper relation to us. We can't properly situate it. You know, I think this is an important point, that they just represent a kind of radical outside of us. You know, and the difficulty is not so much in maintaining this exclusion, but recognizing that it's illusory itself.